You found it. Your home for the best content on your favorite team, the Fighting Tigers of LSU. Do us a favor. Subscribe to the channel. Leave your comments below. Be sure to smash that like button. Let's take a look at the defense and special teams here for LSU. Again, to catch up if you missed it, USA Today put out their season grades for all 131 FBS football programs this year. There were 5 A+, Georgia, Tennessee, Troy, TCU, Tulane. 5 A+. You had a nice number of schools that got an A grade. UConn, and a lot of this obviously was expectation. UConn, Duke, Florida State, James Madison, Kansas State. There's LSU. Their 10-4 season gets an A grade. Michigan, New Mexico State, Oregon State, Penn State, South Alabama, and Washington, if you're looking at the A grade. So that's where USA Today looked at LSU. We gave LSU's offense a solid A, especially considering where they were a year ago and where they are now. A year ago, you were looking at an LSU team that averaged 26 points a game. This year, up that by 8 points per game at 34, and nearly 100 yards per game more on average than a season ago. If you flip it over to the defensive side of the ball, you saw improvement. And a year ago for LSU defensively, it was hard not to be better than they were the year before. The Bo Pelini experiment led LSU to have statistically their worst defense, literally, in the history of the program. So enter Durante Jones, and we all know what happened. Ed Ogeron kept the handcuffs on Durante Jones for roughly half the season. By the time they got to the Alabama game, he finally said, look, run what you want. You saw LSU run more stunts, more blitzes, get a little more exotic. And down the stretch, LSU's defense improved in 2021, but still allowed 377 yards per game and 26.5 points per game. Year to year, so year one under Matt House, you saw LSU allow 354 yards and 22 points per game. So LSU improved by about 23 yards per game and 4 points per game. So you drop that scoring average, and that's why you saw LSU, by and large, win some of the 50-50 games they did. When you can look very clearly at the Alabama game, at the Arkansas game. When you had these coin flip 50-50 games, LSU had success. Florida State, obviously, a different scenario where LSU was quite honestly in it because the defense did play well in the second half and allowed the offense an opportunity to get them back in it. You did not have a Damone Clark this year, who was the heart and soul of last year's defense. And there were times a year ago that team quit. And I don't like to say that word often, but if we should, you and I sitting here, be able to call a spade a spade. Against Kentucky in the second half, LSU got punched in the nose. They didn't respond. Against Ole Miss, LSU laid down, except for Damone Clark. He was the heartbeat of that team, and he was awesome. Micah Baskerville did his best Damone Clark impersonation, but it would be hard to best the guy who was the best linebacker in football a year ago. He got hosed on all the national awards. But Damone Clark, had he played the bowl game, would have led college football in tackles a season ago when he was flat awesome, and you're seeing it right now. Guys coming back from neck surgery to play as a rookie with the Dallas Cowboys. But a great season by Micah Baskerville, and obviously we saw the emergence of Harold Perkins this year, who led LSU in sacks and tackles for loss as a true freshman in a limited role. The really big difference is your secondary took a step back this year. And just on talent alone, when you went from Elias Ricks, Dwight McGlothern, Cordell Flott, who was the highest-rated nickelback by Pro Football Focus in college football a year ago, you replaced all of those guys with veteran guys, and Jarek Bernard-Converse and Mekhi Gardner and Greg Brooks there at the nickel. But you just flat weren't as talented at those positions this year as you were a year ago. And there were times when you faced elite receiving talent where you just couldn't match up. You certainly saw that as evidence in the Tennessee game. You saw it with Johnny, I forgot his last name, the 6'7" receiver from Florida State. Not Johnny Patrick. He was a defensive back that the Saints drafted out of Louisville. You remember Johnny?
Johnny Wilson.
Was it Wilson?
Johnny Wilson.
Johnny Wilson. Okay, the big 6'7" receiver from Arizona State that transferred, Johnny Wilson. You saw it with guys like that at times this year where LSU flat couldn't match up with him because they didn't have the horses. Now, when you look ahead to next year, certainly LSU athletically, they're going to be less experienced. They're not going to have a 4-year starter in Jarek Bernard-Converse and a 3-year starter in Mekhi Gardner, guys who played a bunch of football. but they're going to be dramatically more athletic. When you look at guys like Denver Harris, when you look at some of the transfers, they bring in an all-ACC cornerback from Syracuse, and then on top of that, you throw in the recruits that you have. They've addressed that position. They've addressed the secondary. They're going to be a bit less experienced, but dramatically more talented and deeper than they were this year. And I really think I want to give a hat tip to LSU's defensive line this year because I think they did damn near as well as they could have. Losing Mason Smith, who wasn't just your best defensive player, who's going to be the best player on your team this year. Losing him on the first defensive series was massive. And Mekhi Wingo stepping up is one of the more underrated stories, quite honestly, in this modern era of LSU football. A redshirt freshman transferring in from Missouri who wasn't expected to do much, who comes in and becomes an All-American after your best player goes down in the first defensive series in a season where you really rotated 3 interior defensive linemen. A brilliant job by Matt House to rotate his defensive linemen to try to keep guys fresh by playing ends on the interior and moving Ali Gay into tackle, whatever they had to do to make it work. Savion Jones' emergence, but you just didn't have the horses. And there were times this year, and you saw it against Texas A&M, where LSU just couldn't last 60 minutes in the trenches against elite teams. You saw it against Georgia as well. I think that changes next year. Look, you look a year ago in 2021, you were good there, man. You had B.J. Ojulari. You still had Ali Gay. You had veteran players like Neil Farrell, Glenn Logan, guys that were part of the championship team, and then you were rotating Jay Roy and Jacobian Guillory behind them. Next year, it's a dramatic change. It's a dramatic improvement in numbers and depth and experience on that defensive line, which is why, to answer the original question that I got on Instagram about how does Brian Kelly's team project forward, you could look at every single position, and say in 2023, LSU should be better than they were in 2022. Offensive line, they'll be better. Receiver, they'll be better. Running back, certainly more veteran. You get guys healthier. Quarterback, fifth-year senior. Tight end, you're deeper. Mason Taylor, another year older. You look on the defensive side of the ball, you'll be deeper on the interior. You certainly supplement it on the edge as well. You'll have more bodies at linebacker. You expect Harold Perkins to have a breakout season next year. We just went over the secondary. You should be better at every single position on the field in 23 than you were in 22, which is why there's a lot of reason for optimism. Now, the other thing we have to talk about, of course, is special teams. And we knew that this was going to be a bit of a work in progress. The best coach on LSU staff a year ago was Greg McMahon. And you bring in Poley in to replace McMahon, and that was clearly a miss by Brian Kelly. Cade York's better than Damian Ramos. Avery Atkins, Jay Bramblett, maybe a push there. Bramblett maybe a bit of an edge. But Avery Atkins as a kickoff guy was better than Nathan Dybert, and literally every one of your returners a year ago were better than whatever you put out there this year. Special teams was a mess. It was a disaster. Special teams gets a failing grade for LSU this year. Maybe the one thing that might bump it up to a D-type grade is the fact that Damian Ramos did settle, and Bramblett was a good punter for you, where Slade Roy was pretty flawless this year as a long snapper. So that's a transfer that worked. But your special teams units as a whole were massively flawed, and that phase of the game has got to improve. I'm not saying anything you don't know, but your specialists all return. You get Ramos back, you get Bramblett back, you get Dybert back, you get Roy back. You should be able to plug in Aaron Anderson immediately as your returner. It would be hard to be worse, but your special teams units obviously have to improve because that was a major Achilles heel for LSU in 2022. Hey, thanks so much for watching. Please leave your comments. I love to interact, and be sure to hit the red subscribe button below.